It started in a bar, as all good stories do. It started in Elmer's Old Time Inn. It was a birthday party for a coworker at the hospital I was working at, and I wasn't going to go because I was newly divorced. I was fresh out of college, and I got married right after graduation, and I got divorced right after graduation. So I'm kind of ashamed and humbled and all those things that nice Catholic girls shouldn't feel or always feel. That's where I was when I went to Carol's birthday party that night. And as I was sitting there on a bar stool, I saw another guy there who was working the room, and he was so charming and kind of darkly handsome. And he was like working the room, right? He was telling jokes, and everybody kind of gravitated towards him, and everybody wanted to touch him or hug him, kissing old ladies on the cheek, the whole thing. He had it down. And I just kind of watched, but tried to act like I wasn't watching and tried to act like I didn't really care. But he came to me, and then all this attention he poured on me, and that was pretty exciting for me, especially the way I was feeling. I was feeling like a failure, and here someone was paying attention to me, and it was so nice. And so the evening ended. I gave him my phone number with no expectations. But then the next day at work, the woman who had the birthday party, she said, "Hey, he's quite a cutie, heartbreaker. Too bad he's married." And I'm like, "Oh, he's married." And then I worked second shift at the hospital, and when I got home, he was calling me. And he says, "I need to talk to you. I got to see you again." And I said, "What about your wife?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm not married. That's not true. I need to talk to you. I need to tell you in person." So I said, "Sure." And he came over, and he said, "Well, I am married, but I'm not married." So what happened was, he said he was separated from his wife and that she was wanted by the police for drugs. And she came to his apartment. He was living in Nashville. She came there, and she said, "You've got to run with me from the police or I'm going to kill myself." And he said right in front of him, she started cutting her wrists. And she was bleeding all over his apartment, and he said he was scared. And so he wrapped her up in a blanket, and they drove all the way to Illinois. And when they got to Illinois, the police caught up with her, and they took her to prison. So he said he's technically married, but his wife is in prison, and they'd already separated. And so he had no intention of getting back with her, and that was just the end of that. And I believed him, and I felt bad for him, and what a sad story, and what a strange story, but who was I to judge? And he said, "I can't get a job here in Illinois. I'm having trouble." He said he stayed in Illinois to get a job, but he couldn't find a job. And he was going to have to go back to Nashville unless, and mind you, I only knew him for a few days, I'm ashamed to say, unless I let him stay with me. And since I was newly divorced, I had a small house by myself. And if he could stay with me, then he could stay in Illinois. And I said, okay. And you know what he did next? He stepped out the door, and he pulled in 2 garbage bags full of his stuff. He said, "I knew you didn't want to lose me." He was ready to stay already. And so he moved in with me, and he wasn't working. I was working at nights at the hospital. And he was a drinker, but so was I. And so we went out when I would get off work. We would go out almost every night. And he would overdo it, and he would go kind of to a dark place when he did that. But I knew he'd had a hard life, hard background, and so I didn't really, put him down for that. it just was what it was. And pretty soon, it was not just him going out with me. He was going out without me. He started going out drinking more and more. I would be at work, and I would come home, and he'd already be drunk and in this dark kind of stupor. And that was about the time that he hit me the first time. I came home from work, and he was already drunk. He was just sitting there staring in the house, smoking a cigarette in the dark. And I asked him, what was wrong, and he wouldn't hardly talk. But then he said it was his little girl's birthday. And I'd never heard him say that before. I didn't know he had a child. And I said, oh. And then it took me back to his wife that was in prison. He said, no, it's not her baby. And he's, like, you stupid. Don't you know I had a baby already with somebody else? And I didn't know that. That was new information to me. And I'm processing, and maybe a little jealous or that there's this connection that I didn't know about. And I said, you don't need any more to drink. Because he said, go get me a beer. I said, you've had enough. And he stood up and he lunged at me. And I turned to kind of run, and he grabbed me by the hair, and he slammed my face into a mirror. And he said, look at yourself. Look what you made me do. And I had blood running from my nose. And I was looking at myself. And for some reason, I did think I made him do that. I provoked it. I'm not sure why I believed it, but I 100% did. He was a little rough, and then he threw me to the ground, and then he went and he passed out. And the next day, as I'm getting ready for work, and I have some bruising on my face, and I'm covering it up with makeup, and he comes in, and he apologizes. I'm so sorry, he said. I'm so sorry. I wish you hadn't made me do that. And he said, I'm just so sad because I don't have my little girl with me anymore. He said, one day I just came home, and that stupid bitch, which was his ex-girlfriend, he said, that stupid bitch just took my little girl and left. My whole place was cleaned out, and she was just gone. And it was devastating, and I want you to have my baby. I want you to have a baby with me. And don't you want to have my little girl? And that's when I made a big mistake. I told him about the miscarriage I'd had a few years earlier in college. I said, I don't know if I can have children. Because when I was in college, alone in my college apartment, I didn't even know I was pregnant, and I had a miscarriage. And I think something might be wrong with me. And he got a little cold, but then he was like, well, you might have my baby anyway. And we kind of just continued. We just went on from there. He wasn't working. I was paying for everything. He often would keep my car. More times than not, he would keep my car while I went to work. And I lived in a smallish town. I would walk home at 11 o'clock at night because he would still be somewhere drinking with my car. And I would see my mom. I would see my mom every day. But we didn't talk about, in my family in general, even the bigger sense of my big Catholic family, we didn't talk about uncomfortable or unsavory things. And I did not tell her about his aggressiveness or his drinking too much. I didn't tell her any of those things, any more than I told my friends at work. I mean, I kept everything to myself. I made excuses at work. If I went in, with red eyes, it was my allergies. Running late because something silly, it wasn't because I was trying to cover something up. And we just went on that way, and he finally he did get a job for a very short time at one of the factories, and he hurt his wrist. And he got a settlement check. And when that happened, he said, you know what? I would be such a better person if we got out of here. I would be so much better. And how about we move wherever you want? We'll go wherever you want. And at this point, getting away from what I saw as my past failures, the miscarriage, the divorce, my first relationship, that sounded so great to escape. And so I was pondering this. But in the meantime, he also said, you take such good care of me. You're so great. I want to do something for you. So let's celebrate. Let's celebrate. And tonight, I'll be the designated driver, and you can drink as much as you want, and I'm going to take care of you. And I thought, he is good to me. He is good to me, and that sounds great. Let's go do this. And so we go out, and he keeps saying he's going to the bar to get me another rum and Coke, and we'll be gone for a while, and he'll come back, and he'll bring me a drink. And when we're leaving, I was a little suspicious that it would take him so long to go get me a drink. And I would say, are you sure you're okay to drive? Because we can leave my car here and we can get a ride with one of my friends. And he said, no. I said I was going to drive you home. I'm not drunk. I was not drinking. And as we're heading back home, he runs into the back of another car. And I was flung forward into the window and busted my head and knocked out, immediately knocked out. And when I wake up, I can hear sirens in the background, and he's dragging me. I have blood running off my face onto my sweater, and he's dragging me into the driver's seat. And I said, what are you doing? And he said, baby, if the cops come, they're going to take me to jail. I've been drinking. And I said, well, I've been drinking. I don't want to go to jail. And he said, you'll just get a little slap on the wrist. He says, that's what they do. I will go to jail, and you don't want to lose me, do you? And he stuffs me into the driver's seat, and he even puts on his seatbelt, right? Just for a little added conviction. And then the ambulance gets there, and he taps on my window. And I know him from the hospital. And he says, I know you. And I said, yeah. And I said, I didn't do this. And he said, what? He said, you weren't driving? And I said, no. And he looked, and my boyfriend was already out of the car and talking to the other ambulance driver. And he could see the crack on the passenger side in the window. He said, I think we can tell who was driving the car. He says, but we'll make sure the police know. And then I'm strapped down onto a board and taken to the emergency room. And when I get there, he is shouting from the other room, calling out my name. And the doctor who comes in to take care of me, he says, yeah, your boyfriend's in the other room. I said, is he okay? He said, he was fine until the police came and said they were going to take him to jail. And now he says he's hurt. I said, okay. And then I started to worry that he was going to be angry when he found out that I didn't go along with his story. But he was gone before I was released. And when I was released, I didn't know how I was going to get home. And there were two women standing in the door in the emergency room. And I looked up, and they were in the car that we hit. And I said, I'm so sorry. And they said, we're fine. We stayed here for you. We saw what he did to you, and we want to help you. And I said, how are you getting home? And I said, I didn't know. So they took me home, and they told me, any man who would do something like that to you, you don't know what he's capable of. He'll do anything. And I agreed. Yes, they were right. And they gave me their phone numbers, and they said, you call us, and we will help you with whatever you need. And I said, thank you. And then I got out of the car feeling kind of strong. And then I went inside the house, and the house was dark and empty, and I was alone. And I didn't want to be alone. And when he called the next morning from jail, and he said, "Baby, I'm sorry. Please come and get me." And I did. And I let him come back home. My mother knew I was in a car accident, but I never told her about the awful things that he did. But other people knew, and people were starting to say, "You need to get rid of him. You need to get away." And that's when he said, "We need new friends. These other friends, they don't understand us." And I thought he was right. I really thought I understood him. And we understood each other. And he said, "Nobody loved me like he did." And I thought, he's right. He loves me more and better than anybody else does. And so I was going to listen. And so when he said we could move wherever I wanted, I picked Virginia Beach. It was kind of random. I went to the library and I looked up best places in the country to live. And I stumbled across Virginia Beach, and I said, that sounded pretty good. And so probably within 6 months of meeting him, I packed up everything I owned into a moving truck that we rented with. I had never taken a vacation from the time I worked at the hospital, so I got a big vacation lump sum, and we used that to move to Virginia Beach. I knew one person out there. It was an old friend's younger brother who was stationed in the military with his wife and new baby. And they said we could stay with them for a couple weeks while we looked for a place and got ourselves grounded. And I had no doubt that we would get jobs right away, and I wasn't worried at all. And it was harder than I thought it would be to get jobs because we only had one car, so he wanted to focus, on getting his first. And there was a lot of drinking involved. And like I said, our friends had a new baby, and he started getting louder and louder at night while they were sleeping. And I started worrying about him ruining the friendship. And I said, we got to get out of here. We got to get another place. We got to get our own place. And I still had money from the hospital. And so he got a job in a photography studio at night. We found an apartment, and I put down the first and last month's rent and all that good stuff. And he quit that job after one day. He said he shouldn't be sitting in a studio at night. He should be singing on stage. Ultimately, he wanted to be a country singer. That was his real goal. Unfortunately, the more he drank, the worse he sang. So we had our apartment, and a little bit of money left. No phone, didn't have a phone, couldn't afford to get phones set up. No food. We got donation box from a church, so we were so hungry. And when he would drink, he would eat. So there was rarely any food left for me. I would just get to eat. In fact, when I got a church donation box, I would count how many things were in it. And then I would eat one thing every other day so that I could have it last as long as possible. And to talk to my mother, I would have to walk 4 blocks down the road to the 7-Eleven and use the payphone and call her collect. And I would, as much as I could, I would call her, and she could hear I was having a hard time. But I didn't tell her how hard it was. I didn't tell her, Mom, I'm so hungry. And what started as little squeezes of the wrist or little pinches had started turning into kicks in the back or blows to the head with a ashtray. I didn't tell her any of that. I signed on with a temp service, which was great. I ended up as a temp worker in a bank in Norfolk, and was able to, I felt like I had some friends. I was very close to my boss, and that was a nice change to be able to talk to other people. I didn't share what was going on at home. I was more of everybody's friend and good for telling a joke or whatever, but we didn't talk about personal things like that, or I didn't. He also was with the temp service, but he kept losing the jobs. And sometimes he just wouldn't get up. He wouldn't wake up, and he wouldn't call in. I would wake him up crying and begging him to call in. Of course, we didn't have a phone. And sometimes I would go to and call myself and say, I'm so sorry, my husband has food poisoning and he just can't get to the phone and he can't come in. I would try to save his jobs as much as I could, but it was pointless. And pretty soon the temp service says, Gina, we love you. You're great. You make us look good, but we got to let your boyfriend go because he keeps losing his jobs. But he said that's because he shouldn't be working in a factory or in a warehouse. He should be on stage. And so he needed things like headshots and nice clothes, perms. And so we would have to use the money that should be going for bills or rent or, food would go for things like that, and alcohol, of course. But out of 16 months, we lived in 7 different places because of evictions. He had more than 12 jobs that he burned through. And then he became more controlling, of course, more progressively. Like, I wasn't allowed to hold the bank card, even though it was all my money. He always had the ATM card. He always had the car keys. He refused to have protected sex anymore. He's like, I'm a man. I know how to not get you pregnant. You don't understand these things because you have girl parts. You don't understand. I know what I'm doing. And I suppose I told myself I trusted him, but for the most part, I was walking on eggshells, and I did not want to trigger him. I avoided topics that made him go to a dark place, and I tried so hard not to make him mad, because once again, it was my fault if he got mad. And I really thought I could fix things and make them better if I could just be a better person myself. Well, lo and behold, I did get pregnant. But honestly, I didn't think I'd be able to carry the baby full term. So it wasn't real for me. But the really good part about that was that he hit me less. Instead of punching me, he might yank my hair or shove me, but he wouldn't do as much kicking and hitting. So that was nice. And at work, like I said, I had a nice group of people where I worked, and they knew I was hungry. I was so thin. He was belittling me and calling me a bag of bones and crooked teeth and telling me how haggard I was looking. And the people at work were bringing me food sometimes, not in an embarrassing way, but in a, hey, I made some extra, why don't you have lunch with us kind of way. But if I brought any extra food home, he would take it from me. He said the baby already gets to eat first, so I really didn't require that much extra. Because once again, I didn't really know how biology worked, he said. As soon as my boss found out I was pregnant, she did everything in her power to make me a permanent employee so that I would have benefits and everything. And then she was like, you need more money? I will make sure you get all the overtime you can handle. So I was saving and trying to make sure I had some money. And I had lost connection with my mother right before I found out I was pregnant, because my mother called me on my birthday. That was the one thing he hadn't taken from me yet, was my mother's and my relationship. She called me on my birthday. He grabbed the phone and he wouldn't give it to me. He yelled at my mother and said, she never wants to talk to you again. And then he threw the phone across the room and broke it. And then I thought, I have nothing left. That's it. He took the last thing from me. I don't care anymore. And I've been hiding some sleeping pills because I saw this coming. And he passed out drunk. And I ran and I got those sleeping pills. And I swallowed as much as I could. And I went and I sat on the beach. We lived near Chicks Beach. And I sat there and I prayed to God to forgive me because I just wanted to die. I was so tired of doing this. I just didn't want to do it anymore. And so, as I was sitting there, I was so relieved when the world started to get cold and gray. And I heard somebody's voice. And I opened my eyes a little bit. And there was a woman standing there, and she said, are you okay? And I said, yes. And I closed my eyes again, and then she touched me. And she said, no, can I help you? Do you need some help? And I said, no. And then I tried to put on my act like everything's fine. No, I'm fine. It's okay. And she said, all right. And she backed off a little bit. And she just walked away, but she awakened me, and I coughed up and I started throwing up, and I was like, damn it. I just wanted to go to sleep. And so I went back home and just tried to continue. And it was shortly after that I found out I was pregnant. And then the baby was born. I did it. And when I had my son, everything changed from that moment. Everything changed. I realized I had something to fight for. And instead of wanting to die, all I could think of is I have to live until he's 18 because I'm going to protect him from this monster. He saw that I changed after I had my son, and he knew it because he would make comments on it. Something's different, don't you? He made me call him Daddy, and he said, "Don't you love Daddy anymore? Don't you love him?" I'm like, "Of course I love you," because he said if I left him, he was going to kill me. And not only was he going to kill me, he was going to make my baby watch him do it. So I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew that I was going to protect my son. And so my boyfriend was trying to regain that power that he knew that he was losing over me. Of course, the beatings got worse, but he went to more degrading tactics. He had to break my spirit. Like, one day I came home from work and he called me from the bathroom. We lived we lived in awful places, and this particular place was a little $75 a week motel, and it didn't even have a bathroom door. And he called me from the bathroom, and I go and I poke my head in there, and he's sitting on the toilet naked. He said, "Come here, baby." He's smoking a cigarette. I'm like, I was disgusted, and I said, "What?" And he said, "Daddy needs you. I want you to wipe my ass." I walked away. He said, "Get in here." And he said, "I'm not kidding. I need you to do this for me." And he grabbed my hand and tried to force my hand down the back into the toilet. And I was pulling back, and then I toppled backwards. I hit my head on the door, and he laughed and took care of himself. And then I yelled at him, and that didn't set well if I would ever fought back. And he comes towards me with his hands from wiping himself, and he squeezes my face, and he says, "You think you're too good to wipe my ass?" And he said, "You are nothing without me." My baby at this point is right there in the crib, because we're living in one room, and he's watching my little baby. I mean, he's less than a year old, and my boyfriend lets go of my face, and then he shoves me down on the floor and starts kicking me from behind. And I look up, and my son is like this, looking at me from the crib bars. And I looked at him, and I tried to smile. I tried to smile so that he wouldn't think something was wrong. And I said, "You gotta stop. You gotta stop doing this. You can't do this in front of our baby." And he says, "I'll tell you what. You've been working all these extra hours. Where's all the money?" Some of that money is Daddy's money too, And he went and he took the card from my purse. I tried to hide it, but I didn't do a very good job. He took the card from my purse and went out just on another drinking binge. And when he comes home, he said, "Guess what? Daddy had a good night. I went and I sang on the stage." He went to some karaoke bar, and everybody loved me, and I know what we need to do. We need to move to Nashville. My family's there, he says. My family will help us with the baby, and I will be a big singer, and I'll take care of you. You won't need to do anything, and won't you love that? Won't that be nice? Daddy will take care of you. And I was horrified. I was sick, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I said, "No, you go to Nashville, and I'll stay here with our baby, and then you get settled." And he said, "You're going to come with me to Nashville, or I'm going to kill you. And then I'm going to raise our son and tell him what a bitch his mama was. And then I'm going to take him to a whorehouse and get him laid. And then I'm going to give him drugs. And the whole time he's going to know this is all your fault." So I went to work. And I did something I had not done once before. I went to my boss and I said, "Phyllis, he beats me." And she was a wonderful, wonderful, strong woman. And she said, "You tell me what to do, and I will have the entire volunteer fire team from Gloucester out at your apartment, and we will clean it out, and we will get you away from that asshole, and you will never have to see him again." And I said, "Phyllis, I can't do that, because he says he will kill me, and I believe him." And she said, "What do you want me to do?" I said, "I'm moving to Nashville with him because it's the only way to get him away from here. I said, I'm going to move. And as soon as he goes to work, I'm going to come back. So with my baby, just hold my job. And she said, I will do that. And she got on the phone, and this is a big corporate bank. She gets on the phone with payroll, and she says, I want you to stop all of Gina Cedarwall's checks right now, because I had direct pay. And she says, I will call you and tell you where to start resending them. And then she sent me to a bank down the road to go open a different bank account. And I did, and I came back, and I gave her all the paperwork, and I used her address and all her information so no trail would go back to him. And she kept a hold of all this bank account and had my last few checks sent there instead of to the one he had access to. We went and packed up everything to go to Nashville. And the whole way there, every time we stopped for gas or to go to the bathroom or whatever, I had a matchbook. I didn't smoke, but I had a matchbook in my purse, and then I would write the directions inside every time we stopped so I would know how to drive back home. But I knew if he found it, it would be bad. So we get to Nashville, and we go and we stop at his sister's house first. And his sister's mother-in-law comes in the house, and she says, I have a house right down the road from here. This was up in the sticks outside of Nashville in a town I think called White Bluff on Lover's Leap Road, ironically enough. She said, this house is empty. It's where we used to live, and you can stay in it free of rent until you get jobs. And then you can do whatever you want to do after that. So we went into that house right away, but then he didn't see any need to get a job. The rent's taken care of. He kept looking to see when my checks were coming and getting angry because my checks weren't going into the bank account. And I would say, well, it's that processing me for not being an employee anymore. It's probably just a delay. And he was put out by that. Since his sister lived up the road, he was able to go there to get something to eat and drink. And I had WIC for my son to get his formula and food. So once again, we're just without anything to eat. He put all the utilities in my name. He said he couldn't put them in his name because he had outstanding debts from the last time he lived there. He said we didn't need to pay them, even though they're under my name, because once they turn them off on me, we'll put them under our son's name. That was the plan. So Easter, the time, I feel like I'm getting worried. I'm getting worried that I'm losing my connections back in Virginia, that they're going to forget about me. I'm going to lose that job. I'm not going to have any place to go. And time's ticking away. And then it's Easter Sunday, and he wants to spend it at a celebration at one of his old friends' house. And I said, why don't you go? You go, and you have more fun without me. And then I can stay here and clean up this house and move our stuff into place, and take care of the baby. And he sensed it. He sensed something, and he said, no, you're coming. So we go to the Easter gathering, and it lasts until late at night. And he's so drunk he falls out of a chair outside. And I said, you know what? Why don't you spend the night? Why don't you spend the night here, and I'll go home and I'll come back and get you in the morning? And then his friend says, I'll take you home in the morning. And that's when he got angry. He said, oh no. He says, I'm going home. I'm going home with you right now. So we went back to Lover's Leap Road, And as soon as we pulled up in the driveway, and it's dark out there, this is way out in the sticks, he takes our son into the house, goes, I'm going to go put him into his crib. I'll be right back. I got a surprise for you. And he comes back out with the shotgun. And my son was in the house, asleep in his crib, and here's this man that I know has a mental problem pointing a shotgun at me in the dark. And I ran, and I said, I can't run. My son is in the house. Where am I going to go? And I hurried up, and I dove underneath my car. And he's walking around in the darkness. I can hear him calling my name, and I can hear the crunch of the rocks under his feet, and I'm holding my breath. And I don't know what to do, and there's no place for me to go. But then there's headlights coming down the road, and somebody stops at our house. And it's his sister's mother-in-law who owns the house. And it's strange because it's late. It's probably 1 o'clock in the morning. And she says, oh, good, you're still up. And she sees, and he hurries up and he puts the gun aside. And I come out from underneath the car like nothing's wrong. Hey, it's good to see you. So glad you're here. And she said, I just want to get something out of our house. And I'm like, great, come on in. Because I wanted back in that house really bad where my son is. And I go in and I see he has tucked the gun right next to the door. And she says, I need to get something out of the basement. And I said, I'll go with you. Because I wanted to talk to her. I wanted to get her to help me. And he says, don't talk about me while you're gone. And then I thought, I can't talk to her. I can't talk to her, and I don't know where her loyalties are. I can't do this. So I walked downstairs with her, and I chickened out, and I walked her back up and out. But by the time she was leaving, he'd passed out. He passed out. And I took that gun and I went and I hid it way down deep in their basement. And I said to myself, he's going to kill me and my time is running out. A couple nights later, he was up at his sister's house. They had a bonfire. And he called. We had a phone. We got a phone. He called and he said, come on up here. We're having a great time. And I said, no, I'm already putting our son to bed. Just enjoy yourself. And I start bundling things up tight, like my son's clothes, just making them as tight as I could, his toys, everything into a laundry basket. And then I called my boss and I said, I'm coming, please don't forget about me. And she says, you come when it's safe. She goes, I've already found you a place to live and all your money is in your bank account and I have all your information for you. You come when it's safe. And I said, I'm coming. It's okay. And then there was screaming outside. It was horrible, horrible screaming. And the door opened up with a slam, and it's his sister's husband. He's carrying my boyfriend like a child. He's carrying him like this, and his legs are flailing around. He's kicking stuff off the wall, and he's screaming, I'm paralyzed, I'm paralyzed. He had drank so much that he couldn't walk, and he's screaming and frantic. And the brother-in-law just says, he's just drunk. What do you want me to do with him? I said, go put him in bed. And so he does. He goes and drops him in bed and takes off. And then he's calling for me from the bed. Lay next to me, lay by me. I'm so scared. I can't walk. And so I laid down. And as soon as I heard his breathing change, I knew he was asleep. I got out of bed. And I went and I had to think about how I was going to do this. Like, if he woke up, I knew it was going to be bad. So I decided first I would carry everything out to the car that I could. And if he caught me, I would just say I was looking at the stars, right? So I did that. And by everything, I mean formula and diapers and baby clothes and toys, whatever I thought was important. Because, at times like this, you realize what's important. And it wasn't the trinkets or anything like that. And then I kept stopping and listening, and I could hear him snore. I'm like, good, good. And then the last thing I did was I scooped up my son and put him in his little car seat. And I set him in the car, and the house was still quiet. The house was still quiet. And we started heading down the road. And I knew at the foot of the hill there was a gas station. And I didn't have any money, but I did have my son's piggy bank, and it had a lot of change in it. So I stopped to get gas. And then I realized I'd forgotten my purse, which shouldn't matter, but my purse also had my Social Security card and my driver's license. And I thought, what could he do with that? Because I already knew that he had this habit of seeking revenge and using people's information. I gotta get it. I gotta get it. And I went back up the hill, and I stopped at the house. The house was still dark, and it wasn't morning yet. And I had turned off the headlights before we pulled in and everything. And I opened the door, and I could still hear him snoring. I said, thank God. And I grabbed my purse, and I hurried back to the car, and we hurried down that road. And I tell you, I cried all the way down the road. I cried until the sun came up. And my son sat in the back seat, and he was asleep, and he was safe, but I still cried because I didn't know what was next. And then there was a billboard on the side of the road. And all it was a happy face. It was just a silly, happy face. And it said, smile, God loves you. And I turned and I looked at my son, and I kind of laughed, because I guess that's what I needed to know right that minute. A car overheated, and it kept overheating, and I couldn't drive over 50 miles an hour, and I didn't know how to fix anything. It was an old car, old Chrysler LeBaron. So I kept stopping. I stopped at every single road stop, changed diapers, and let the car cool off. So it took a long time. To get back to Virginia. But I did. I made it. And when I got to the house that my boss had gotten for me, her husband checked my car. He says, I don't know how you got here. He said, I refilled the water. I guess it goes in a radiator. He said, and it all poured right back out. He said, you have a hole in there the size of a quarter. And my friend, it was her house. She said, I know how she got here. Prayer did it, because we all love her, and we're so glad she's back safe and sound with that sweet baby. And I wanted to celebrate. But I knew it wasn't over, or at least it didn't feel like it was over. So I went back to work, and everyone was so welcoming and so kind. And my boss, she said, you need to protect yourself. And she said the bank has a service of some kind of legal consultation that we were allowed to use. And she sent me. And she said, if you need to get some kind of protection or protective order, the bank had his picture. They had his glamour shot, his headshot all over the bank. So he was not setting foot in that bank. But I needed to do something for the outside and to keep my son safe. So I went to talk to this lawyer, and I told her about the abuse and about the escape, and she just looked at me, and her face didn't change. And she said, I don't see any bruises on you. I said, I know. I said, it took 3 weeks for me to get out of Nashville, and I tried so hard not to make him mad for those 3 weeks. I worked so hard because I couldn't let myself get injured or hurt. And she said, anyone can say someone beats them without any proof. There's nothing I can do for you. And I said, so I would have been better off if I let him beat me more. She said, basically, the only thing I can do for you is give you a phone number for counseling. And that is what she did. So I didn't get any protection in place. And I went back to work. And my boss says to me, you know how you feel about your son? I said, yeah. And she said, your mom feels like that about you. I hadn't talked to her in over a year. She never knew I was pregnant. She didn't know I had a baby who was almost a year old now. And she said, your mother feels that same way about you. And I cried. And I said, I miss her so much. And she said, do you want to talk to your mother? I said, yes, I do. But I don't know how. And she says, how about this? I will call your mother and I can tell her what's happened to you. And she says, that way you can just talk to her and you don't have to rehash all of this. And I said, yes, that's what I want. And a little bit later, the phone on my desk rang, and I picked it up, and it was my mother. And she said, Gina, I've missed you so much, and I love you. And nothing else matters. And I was so happy to be able to bring her back into my life. And then a few days later at work, Phyllis comes to me and she says, someone says your aunt is on the phone and something's happened at home. And I said, which aunt? Because I had a very big family. And she said, I don't know. And she said, are you sure it's safe? And I thought, well, it must be my Aunt Chris. She's my favorite aunt. She probably wants to talk to me, too. It's been a long time. And they connect the phone to me, and I said, hello? And the woman said, is this Gina? And I'm like, that's not my aunt. And I said, yes. And then it's his voice. He found me, and he says, why did you leave, Daddy? Please come back home. Please bring Pooh Bear back home. I'm so sorry. I will get anger management counseling, and we can be a family. And I said, I'm glad you're going to get help, but I'm not coming back. You need to do this for you. And then he cried. And I said, stop crying. It never helped when I did it. And then his voice changed to angry. And he said, if you don't come home, I'm going to ruin your life. And then my boss was right there. Actually, my whole department at work was right there, all of them touching me and giving me their support. And she hung up. She hung up on him. And she said, is there anything he can do to you? Because tell me now, and we will make sure we are ready, and we will fix this. And I said, no, there's nothing. And a couple nights later, after I had taken a shower and put my son to bed, there was a terrible noise at the front door of the house, and a SWAT team had surrounded the house, and I was arrested because he had called the police and said that miscarriage that I had had, that he never witnessed, that he was never part of 5 years earlier, he said was not a miscarriage, that it was a baby that was born and I had killed, and I was arrested based on that and taken away from my son in the night.